Hi, everybody, and welcome. This is Dave Opton speaking, and on behalf of both Ford and myself, we're delighted that you've taken some time from your busy day or afternoon or evening, depending on where you are out there in cyberspace. But in any case, we're delighted that you've taken some time to join us for today's program. And we're going to get into that in very short order. But before I do, I just want to go over a couple of sort of housekeeping things, so that particularly for those of you who are new to these calls, so that you understand kind of what the format is, how it works, and what you can expect, and just generally how it operates. So the short version is this. Even though we're doing this via the internet and phone and so forth, this is not a formal sort of webinar presentation that most of us are used to seeing in a platform like this, even though we're using the same technology. Neither Ford nor I have brought, prepared presentations to show you or to share with you, although certainly as members of ExecuNet, you have access to lots and lots of those. But this is a much more informal, kind of free-flowing setting. In other words, both Ford and I are here simply as resources for those of you on the call. We are here to try to share with you our thoughts, suggestions, ideas as it relates to any particular issue that you would like us to address. So in that sense, you set the agenda. We don't. That being said, how do you kind of get your questions to us? If you've been on, it works pretty much like instant messaging. If you look over there to the right, you'll see the kind of the dashboard, if you will, for GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar. And down towards the bottom of that is a chat area. And all you have to do is post your question. I think you just send it to staff or just put it in there. We'll be able to see it. Don't worry about confidentiality. We don't even use first names. We'll just take the questions, as many of them as we can in the time that we have. And as I said, we'll be happy to try to share our thoughts with you. And so that's how kind of how the format works, if you will. So if you've got questions, please feel free to post them, and we'll get to them as quickly as we can. The other thing I wanted to say as an aside, there are probably many of you on the call today who recognize Ford's name because just a few weeks ago, he did a formal webinar for us, the title of which was Negotiating Your Compensation, the Rules of the Game. There was a lot of interest in that program. He did a terrific job, as he always does. And so we thought, as a follow-up to that, because we had people on that webinar who with lots and lots of questions. In fact, I was talking to Ford before we went on the air today to see if he'd caught up with all of those emails yet, and he has. But we thought that we would ask Ford to join me on today's program, kind of as a follow-up to that webinar. So if you've got any kind of career-related issue, as I said, both of us will be happy to contribute. But particularly if it's around the area of compensation, I'm happy that Ford could join me again today. For those of you, by the way, who don't happen to have attended that webinar or don't know more about Ford's background, let me just tell you that he is the president of Career Potential, as you can see on the slide. And his firm helps clients take charge of their careers, create the work they love, and earn what they deserve. He has held senior consulting positions at 3 of the nation's largest career services firms. His articles and interviews have appeared in hundreds of magazines and newspapers, and he has conducted presentations at scores of companies, associations, and universities. In addition to that, he has been a frequent guest on television and radio programs around the country. And on top of all of that, he is the author of 2 books. One is called Get the Job You Want, Even When No One's Hiring, published by Wiley, as was the second book, which is called The Ultimate Career Guide. So if you needed any kind of proof that we have an expert with us today, certainly that should add to that. Ford, welcome. Glad you could make it.
Dave, it's a pleasure. I'm so glad to be back with you again.
Okay, well, let's get going. Let me start with this question. And this, it's not specifically compensation related, but I'm glad this person brought it up because it comes up frequently in terms of a frustration point. And this person says, look, I've had what I thought was a really good interview, but you don't hear back from the interviewer or the hiring manager. You send a couple of emails asking for an update, but no response. Could either of you share your opinion on at what point do you just give up? Ford, what do you think?
Okay. Well, look, this is a very, very common complaint.
Yeah.
In the old days, 20, 30 years ago, companies were a lot more polite about this. They would send you a note, they would give you a call, but it seems like all that has passed. It seems like now it's treated with a lot less respect, and unfortunately that's just the way it is. So people need to not take it personally. It's just the way it is. It's not a reflection on you necessarily. It's just the way people are these days. Now, with that being said, of course you want to get a response and you want to hear what's going on with your situation. And so there are some things that we can do to sort of improve your odds or make it more likely that you can get a response. On my website, by the way, which is careerpotential.com, there is an articles page, and one of the articles there is called Follow-Up Steps After the Interview. Follow-Up Steps After the Interview. I would urge people who are concerned about this to take a look at that article. Now, it's not going to solve all your problems. It's not going to make people more responsive. It's not going to suddenly make people call you exactly when you want them to call you. But it does give you some strategies specifically about how to, facilitate this process. And one example I can give you right now is that when you're finishing up at the interview, when you're actually at the interview and it's starting to wrap up, I believe that the last thing you should talk about is time frame and expectations for next steps. So instead of just leaving the interview and saying, well, thanks, bye, I hope to hear from you, instead ask questions like, what is your time frame for making a decision? And if I don't hear from you by that date, may I contact you directly? And if so, do you prefer to be contacted by phone or by email? And you can also ask a question, which is, am I being considered as a serious candidate for this position? So there's a lot of questions you can ask at the end of the interview, which will set things up in such a way that you'll have better and more responsiveness after the interview is over.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that, and I think certainly good counsel for sure, and it is a frustrating thing, particularly if you have been led to believe that you're a serious candidate and so forth, and a process which sometimes recruiters will use called keeping somebody warm and interested in the process. Other times they don't respond because they feel they're too busy or don't have the professional courtesy that any of us would like. To the point of follow-up, I guess I would say since you only have access to a certain amount of information, you've got to make a judgment based on what your interactions have been beforehand. And I can tell you when I was going through this, I kind of had my own sort of number in my head in terms of when people had followed up with me on whatever it was, and there's a certain line you get to where it crosses over between expressing real interest and following up and so forth, and starting to become a pain in the neck. And I think all of us have that line. It just differs for some of us. So absent any other information, whatever that line is in your head, that's probably what I would use, unless you had other information to make you do something different. Ford, this person says, look, often a corporation does a benchmark to evaluate compensation for its employees, which doesn't seem to align with the job that I'm doing. This data is used to keep compensation alone or above or lower. How can I truly measure my potential in the marketplace, given my skill sets? If you can kind of understand what they're asking here.
I think I understand, but let me just say this. You cannot base your own financial value on one company's data or one company's perceived value of different jobs and what they should pay. Instead, don't be just a citizen of that company. Be a citizen of the world. Go out and do more research. Talk to more people. Look at more databases. Talk to more human resource people and career coaches. Look at salary websites. By using all of these resources, you can put together a kind of a blend or an amalgam of all your research, and you can come up with a range that you think is a lot more realistic. Also, keep in mind that depending on the company you're with, you could be perceived as being extremely high value or not so high value because the company has a different culture, different product line, different service, different environment. And so what you might be able to command at one company might be a lot less or a lot more than you can command at another. So this topic of perceived value is very specific to each particular organization. It's important to do your homework and to do your research. Do not fall into the trap of being paid what the company has previously designated. Instead, what you should do is be paid what you're worth. And that word worth is very subjective depending on the company and the environment. Mm-hmm. But it's up to you to do some research, to talk to a lot of people, and to feel your way through this with help and support. I don't think you should do this all by yourself, but instead use either online tools or coaches or human resource people you may know to get a broad-based database of what you really are worth in the market.
Thanks, Ford. Let me just take a moment here for those of you who might have arrived a little bit late to today's program. So if you've got questions on whatever topic it might be relating from a career management perspective, just go ahead and type it in to the area that you see over there on the right, and Ford and I will be more than happy to try to answer them or share our opinions with you on whatever subject you'd like us to address. Oh, this person just quickly, Ford, would you please name again, what was the title of the article that you mentioned? They were having trouble hearing it.
Sure. Follow-up steps after the interview. Follow-up steps after the interview.
And it's available on your site?
On careerpotential.com on the articles page.
Okay, fair enough.
Thank
you. All right. This person says, look, I was highly compensated prior to getting laid off in July. The most elevated title I ever achieved was director, yet my compensation was more commensurate with that of many vice presidents. However, when applying for vice presidential positions, I am frequently turned down due to the concern that I have not formally held that title, even though the level of my responsibility has at times in my career been more it's a long question, so it's hard to catch up with it here. Even though it's been more than that and correlates to positions much higher across organizations. But I'm finding the opportunities only at a 20 to 40% less than what I've been earning. Yet those companies find out what I was making, and they shy away because they're afraid that I'm a flight risk because I was making much more. Do you have any advice for overcoming this conundrum?
Well, it's complicated. You know, you have a very common situation, but every person's situation is different, and in some ways it's kind of complicated. So I'll say a few things about this. First of all, congratulations that you were highly compensated in the past, and unfortunately you're being artificially penalized by the fact that the last position had an inappropriate title for you, or the title didn't match the level of your contribution. Mm-hmm. So that's a problem, but it's something that I think you can overcome if you know how to articulate your value in a very clear and compelling way to new employers. Don't let them get stuck on your title. Address it directly. Don't hide around it. Don't hide behind it. Address it directly. Talk about the fact that your title was not appropriate, not commensurate with your level of contribution and your compensation. Talk about the fact that that company that you worked for in the past, for whatever reason, had low-sounding titles, and make it very clear that you operated at the level of a VP or above, that you were compensated as a VP or above, and that your level of contribution to the company was much higher than that of a manager or a lower level title. So you have to come right out and talk about it, and don't hide behind it. Don't sit there hoping they don't figure it out, because they will. Another thing is that you really need to get very good at telling your accomplishment stories so that they have evidence and proof that you really did contribute at a very significant level, at a strategic level, and make a big impact at your past employer. Otherwise, they will just assume that you were contributing at a medium level, not a really high level. Also, you mentioned that they know what you've been earning. How do they know? Did you tell them? I think it's a good idea to not tell them what you've been earning and to hold off on that until unless they begin to make you an offer. Then you want to find out what they're offering before you tell them what you're asking for or what you were earning in the past. In an ideal scenario, the employer will never know what you were earning before, and instead they'll pay you based on the value they think you'll bring to their company, not on a random number that was ascribed to you at a previous company. So in other words, there's many facets to this. It's a complicated question, but those are a couple of quick tips that may help.
Yeah, and the other thing to remember, and most of us who've been around the business world for a while certainly are aware of this, particularly if you've ever changed industries from one to the other, and that is that companies have lots of different policies when it comes to titles. I'll give you a quick example. I worked for a company at one point where the director title was only, by policy, was only used for people on corporate staff. And it was a large company, so that many of the managerial titles that company used were the equivalent of vice presidencies in lots of other companies that were smaller. So that can also be something to to keep in mind as you get into these kinds of things. But I certainly totally agree with Ford that before you even get to that kind of stuff, if you have the opportunity to demonstrate your value and what you bring to that occasion, you're in a much better situation in terms of being able to reach an accommodation when it comes to compensation. Ford, anything you want to add to that?
No, but thanks, Dave. That was good.
Okay. This person says, as a senior executive in the current company, a significant salary reduction was accepted, 35 to 40% of the market rate, in exchange for equity in the company. How do you suggest I manage the discussion with a potential employer?
I'm not sure what they're saying. Are they saying that at their last job they took a salary cut of 30 to 40% in order to get some equity? And
I think he's saying I was in an environment where they offered me equity, and therefore as the quid pro quo for that my salary, instead of being what it might have been in the marketplace without that equity, was about 35 to 40% lower. How do I address that when I'm talking to a different employer?
Okay, thank you. So I have two answers. One is that you can talk about what your compensation was before you took this salary cut, excuse me, and also you can put it right out there that they made you a very generous offer. It was an honor to be given this opportunity, and it was a recognition of your great contributions and your value to the company that they made you this offer of accepting equity. And you were happy to take the reduction because in the long run it would be much more successful for you financially to accept their offer of the equity. Now, so that's one answer. The other answer is, again, why are you talking about your past salary in the first place? In my world, you don't talk about salary until and unless you get to an offer, and only then it's when they tell you the range first before you do. In an ideal world, the employer never knows your past compensation. Now, there is an exception to this. If you are working with an external recruiter, that means an executive search consultant who works for a search consulting company on the outside. That person, if they are representing the position, that person will ask you your compensation and your history and what you're looking for. And in that case, you should tell them. But there again, it's a subtle situation. Is the recruiter going to tell the employer what you are earning, or are they going to try to sell you for what your potential is at the new company? So everything is different. Every situation is a little bit different. But please keep in mind that in an ideal world, the employer has no idea what you were earning before, and it's none of their business.
Fair enough. This person, Ford, says, as we network with a company, is it a good or bad idea to network with individuals who would potentially be a subordinate of yours, or only to try to network with people who are at a peer level or above?
Well, I don't think it matters whether they're below or on your level or above your level. That's not the determining factor. I think the determining factor is, can they be of help to you potentially? And secondly, are they safe territory? You know, there are some people you don't want to network with because they can go back to your current boss and tell him you're looking for a job and let the cat out of the bag. Or there are some people who might not represent you well or might not like you particularly. So, you know, there's all those other factors that help you determine who to network with and who not to network with. But I don't think a determining factor is what level do they work at.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. You know, particularly if you come into that type of interaction with the right attitude, and by that I mean we have always tried to express that by saying that, look, effective networking, and I think this is true on any level, whether it has to do with a job search or just in terms of professionalism in general in the business world, and that is effective networking is really much more about giving than it is about getting. And as long as you are conducting an interaction with somebody with that as your kind of base case, then you know who you're networking with and what level they happen to be in is I think is irrelevant, because what they are receiving from you is help in some form, fashion, or another, which is helpful to them. They don't feel like they're being you know, used or abused in any way, and I think irrespective of level would appreciate it. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Ford, or not.
No, but I think that's well said. I'm happy with that.
Okay. Let's see. This caller wants to know, are there ever any situations where corporations ever ask for copies of W-2s or 1099s? That's never happened to me at a Fortune 500, but I've heard it from others. Ford, could you comment on what is the trend on this in this day and age?
It does happen. It tends to happen more at lower levels, a little bit less at very high levels. But I sound like a broken record. I don't think it's reasonable for a company to ask you for that, certainly not at the executive level. And I don't think that people should be handing out W-2 forms to employers. You know, this is a sign that the conversation is going in the wrong direction. So I think it's a good idea not to do that. But does it happen? Yes, companies will ask for it, but that doesn't mean you have to give it to them.
Yeah. Let me ask a question corollary to that, Ford, because I get asked this, and it has to do with W-2s and 1099s. What about the situation where it's not a company, it's a search firm? You're contacted by an executive recruiter. I've had this happen to me, and I've certainly talked to plenty of other members, where the search consultant is asking you for a 1099 or a W-2 as part of the qualification process. Mm-hmm. What is your view on that?
Well, I have two answers on that. As I said earlier, if you're working with an external executive search firm, then they can ask what your compensation has been and what you're looking to earn, and in most cases you would tell them, because they have the incentive to get you as much money as possible. Again, that's an external search firm, not an internal search person who works for the employer. Right. So that's one answer. Second answer is, when a recruiter contacts you, and if you're going to agree to work with that person or they're agreeing to work with you, on a particular position, then this conversation needs to involve some level of trust. It needs to have confidentiality. It needs to have trust. You're supposed to trust them on many levels, and they're going to be trusting you on many levels. That's what professional search people do all day long. So when they say, "Oh, you made $200,000 last year," well, I need to see the documentation. Please send me your your pay stubs or whatever it is. That sends up a red flag to me. Where's the trust? What's your incentive to lie? If you're a prominent executive, a successful business person, why would you start making up stories? So I don't like this whole theme of them asking you for proof and evidence. It sets the wrong precedent, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. That doesn't to say it doesn't happen, but I certainly think it tells you something about the culture that you're thinking of joining.
Right.
And I would, what was a corollary sort of question I had for that is not a question really, but a point of view, Ford, and I'd be interested in your opinion on it. And it's this. I know that compensation and the negotiations around that, the negotiation game, if you will, or whatever we all want to call it, isn't going to go away. It's been around for a long, long time. And I may be very naive in my thought process here, but I've always believed that that it's in the best interest of any employer that when they make an offer to someone, that offer is competitive and fair. And the reason I say that, and they have access to salary data and so forth and so on, and I realize it can be influenced by internal compensation policy and so forth. But at the end of the day, again, with the trust factor involved here, it should be something which they feel comfortable is competitive and very fair. And if that's the case, and I believe that most companies kind of operate on that basis, because if they bring somebody in and have done that by kind of lowballing them, if you will, or taken unfair advantage in some way, that employee is going to find that out at some point, particularly in this day and age with the transparency and so forth. And the result of that, I think, is pretty obvious in terms of how it's going to make someone feel. So I just would be interested in your thoughts on, am I being really too naive here or not?
Maybe a little bit. Let me explain what I mean.
Okay.
A company, well, you're assuming that a company thinks about this a lot and that they have a hiring philosophy or a compensation philosophy, and I think that's a big assumption. I think that many companies, unfortunately, don't think about this much. They just like to get people for the lowest they can reasonably pay, and they use salary as a screening mechanism, which is also a big error in judgment.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, because they say just go out and find me candidates who make between 110 and 120, which is completely absurd. But a lot of companies do that, and the companies very rarely have a particular or defined compensation philosophy about how they hire and how they pay. You have many different executives hiring many different people inside a company, and they may be all doing it different with different kinds of priorities, different kinds of strategies, different thoughts about what's reasonable and what's not. So I think if you are naive at all, it's to assume that companies have really put their heads together and developed a solid, consistent philosophy across the company. I think that's a bit naive. Now, The second thing I want to say is this. Of course, a company should ideally offer a compensation package that is fair, reasonable, and competitive. But let's keep in mind that this is a negotiation, which means that the person who's offering the salary will offer the lowest salary they can because it's a starting point, and they may be expecting that there's going to be a negotiation to ensue. So the point is here, a good company will offer a competitive salary right out of the chute. It'll probably be on the lower end of their range because it's a trial balloon and they want to see how the candidate responds. So the first offer is never the best offer, and it should always be negotiated under any circumstances.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Maybe I wasn't as specific as I should have been, but yeah, I certainly understand that part. And
Okay.
maybe part of my philosophy is influenced by the fact that I was working for a Fortune 50 company, and so they do care about that stuff and pay pretty close attention.
But I really think a lot of companies don't, Dave.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
Okay.
If you do get an offer, should you negotiate on the spot, or should you wait 24 hours or more to negotiate?
Well, that's a great question. It's a little bit of both. Let me explain. I never believe in going into a full negotiation right there in the interview as soon as they make you an offer, because experience has shown that when you leave the interview and drive home, you're going to remember things that you should have asked but didn't. You're going to think of topics that you wish you had brought up about the compensation but you didn't think of it, or you forgot. In other words, when you're at an interview, it's a fairly nervous and stressful situation. You're not thinking as well as you might normally under other circumstances. So don't go through the whole negotiation right then and there, because I think you'll regret it later. You'll think, oh, I should have said this. I should have brought this up. Oh, why didn't I do that? On the other hand, when they do make you an offer at the interview, I believe that it's fine to take down all the information, write it all down, make sure you understand the complete offer, and I think it's fine to act a bit perplexed and disappointed about the level of compensation they're offering you. You can let it be known that you're not exactly thrilled, but that you're intrigued and that you're excited about the possibility of working with them. And then you kind of say, look, let me give this some thought. I want to discuss it with my family and review your offer, and then I'll get back to you and we can discuss some of the details, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to come to an agreement. So it's a little bit about body language in the interview, and then later you come back after the interview within 24 to 48 hours and tell them the items that you want to negotiate, and then the negotiation begins.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. Thanks, Ford.
Sure.
This person says, you keep mentioning that you should not be sharing your current salary with the potential new employer. So my question is, how do you avoid this when the standard HR application form directly asks this history question, as does the interviewer?
Mm-hmm. Well, Dave, we've talked about this many times, and you already know what I'm going to say, but I'll say it anyway. I understand the question. It's a very good question, and it comes up all the time. Some people don't like my answer, but here's my answer. Under no circumstances do I believe that candidates should be filling out their salary history and salary requirements on an online application. I also don't think they should be filling out that information even on an application form, let's say, when they walk into the building. It's just not fair. They're asking you to give their whole salary information, and I don't think that should be done at this early stage. They haven't even heard from you. They don't know you. They don't know what you can offer. You haven't articulated your value. You haven't told your accomplishment stories. You know, it's just totally premature, and they're using salary as a screening mechanism. So this is where people will say to me, but Ford, the application form requires me. I have to put down my salary information, otherwise I can't continue with the application. My answer is, yes, that's right, so don't continue with the application. See, you never win. You can never, 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 never win when you fill out or reveal your salary information ahead of the interview process. It always is a losing proposition. Does this mean you have to walk away from certain job opportunities that you might want to apply for? Yes, you might have to walk away. The better situation, the ideal situation, is when you come into an interview situation, usually through networking, and you're sort of pre-approved because you came in through an approved person, a mutual contact or a friend, and they have a nice conversation with you, they get to know you, and maybe, just maybe, they'll get to the point of thinking about you working at their organization. And maybe they'll say, we really like you, we'd love you to come work for us, what's it going to take to bring you on board? As opposed to, what was your salary, and we need to know all your compensation history before we can interview you. You see, it's a very different approach. people, in my opinion, need to be more strict about this. They need to be more disciplined about this and not fall victim to what I think is a true abuse in the hiring process.
And I certainly don't disagree with that, although on the other hand, and I've been running around the kind of the world of career management for, God help me, 50-something years, this issue has never gone away. It's always been there. And Ford is absolutely right in that companies, and most of us have worked for companies, you know, what do they use that for? Rightly or wrongly, they use it as they're there to screen you out, not screen you in. And that's why that stuff is there. I think it's as Ford's already mentioned, it's a non sequitur in many respects, but that doesn't change the fact that they use it, particularly now online and places like that, because it's easy and so forth. So you've just got to, and one thing that Ford didn't mention, but obviously comes into play here, and that is the psychological pressure or real pressure that potential candidates feel depending on where they are in this process. In other words, the pressure that says, gee whiz, if I hold to this principle here, I may not get this job and I need this job. Well, that's a different set of circumstances, but it doesn't change kind of the principle that I think Ford was talking about. And quite frankly, I don't know if this is how true it is these days, but I think that and a lot of it in the employment process these days, employers, at least certainly if it's a decent-sized organization, may be a little bit more open to understanding this than maybe it was in 10 or 15 years ago. I don't know, Ford, you probably have some thoughts on that.
No, I agree with everything you're saying, and let me just say a few more things. I have great empathy for people who are in the tough circumstance that Dave just described, where you're on your last dollar and you have to get a job, otherwise your spouse is going to throw you out of the house. Look, right. I understand that sometimes it's a high-pressure situation.
Sure.
I do. But I still urge people to hold out as long as they can and not become a victim of this abusive practice that so many employers employ. So I really do have a lot of empathy. And also, if people were on the webinar that we did a while back, you know that there are specific phrases and sentences
right.
that allow you to defer and deflect the salary topic until
right.
the appropriate time. And these same phrases help you to get the employer to name a range or a figure first, rather than you having to name a range or a figure first. So there are very specific ways to address the question, very specific phrases and sentences to use, so that you can flip the conversation around and make it go more to your benefit rather than going to your disadvantage.
Yeah, and I just want to quickly underscore Ford's comments relative to networking, because when you're doing it in cyberspace and stuff like this, your choice is either continue or not to continue, as opposed to networking your way into an organization, which is more of a conversation and is a totally different way of getting at this sort of stuff that doesn't put it into a zero-sum sort of a situation, or at least not
exactly. Exactly, Dave.
Question. I'm a former vice president, executive vice president of finance, who 5 years ago left that environment to pursue an entrepreneurial opportunity outside of my industry. So my current title and industry do not reflect my extensive financial experience. Could you comment on how do I now get considered for senior financial positions, since most screening seems to be done by title?
Well, I'm assuming from the question that this person is leaving their entrepreneurial venture and going back into corporate. Is that what you're assuming,
That's what it sounds like to me, yeah. I would answer it on that basis.
So once again, no, your current title or the title you had in your entrepreneurial venture may not reflect your senior finance background, but what you can certainly do is, once again, leverage the title that you had previously. You were Executive VP of Finance. Well, so make that very clear to the prospective employers that that's your sweet spot, that's where you spent your time, that's the level that you achieved, and that you want to get back to a similar or higher level financial position. I just think it's honestly as simple as that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I would go at it from the basis of, look, you know, my title now is because I'm in we have been doing a totally different thing, which I tried, but is really irrelevant to you know, to the financial world that we're talking about here. And here's what I was. I think that makes all kinds of sense.
Right. Exactly.
It does to me. Let's see. If you're at the point where you are given an offer, can or should you negotiate to be compensated for membership in professional organizations or C-level advisory groups, such as a Vistage or organizations like that, as a perk, I guess he's asking.
Right. So everything can be negotiated. As people who were on the seminar or the webinar know, there's a long, long list of things that can be negotiated. And at higher levels, at executive levels, you'd be amazed the kinds of things that some executives will negotiate for. Mm-hmm. So what you're talking about here, which is memberships in professional associations and things of that nature, or conferences that you want to attend or what have you, dues and publications, prices for those sorts of things, these are things that are often negotiated as part of a compensation package. So unless it's completely unreasonable, I think the answer is yes, you can certainly negotiate for those types of things. The real question is, what are the priorities? What are the main things that are most important to you? You know, you can't go back and try and negotiate 26 things. You can go back and try and negotiate 3 or 4 things, maybe 5 at the most. So you have to sit down and decide what's most important to you to negotiate for, and if your topic of association membership and things like that, if that's really, really important to you, then by all means, make that part of your negotiation package.
Yep. Good show. This person wants to know, what is your response when early on in the process you ask what the salary range the employer has for the role, and the response is well under the market or your compensation history and expectations, especially given that you may feel that the employer may be lowballing you?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I think it's great that you asked the question and that you got the company to reveal the salary range ahead of time. So that's good. Secondly, if it's way, way below what you thought, that may be a warning sign that you're not doing enough homework or research. In other words, you should never go in there and be totally blindsided. You're expecting 200 and they offer you 80. There's something wrong there. That shows that maybe you didn't do your homework. If you had done your homework, you may have found out that the job really is at a much lower level, or that it's not appropriate to your level of skill and experience. My history, my experience tells me that if you do a lot of research up front, you'll get a pretty good sense of what the job should pay, at least within a certain range, and that you won't be totally shocked by some very, very low number. So you need to do some more homework perhaps and get a better understanding ahead of time of what the job should probably pay. Now, if you do all of that and you still are amazed by how low their price is, then you might have to have a candid conversation that says something like, you know, I'm very interested in this position and I think there's a lot of potential here, and I'm really interested in the company and so forth, but just based on what you just told me, I think we may have a potential mismatch, and I want to just, you know, talk about that briefly to make sure that I'm not wasting your time and I'm not wasting my time. In other words, have a candid conversation in that circumstance if they come right out and give a number that's way much lower than you were expecting.
Yeah. This person, in regard to going back to the online applications and so forth, says on some online applications have an asterisk for required, so that you cannot submit an application without a salary figure. So is 0 or NA an option? I think it depends on how they've got the thing set up, is whether or not it will accept something like that or not.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
So the answer is yes, if you can get away with it, great. But as Dave said, some of these online systems will not permit that, and they really do require a real salary in there. And you know my answer to that, which is don't fill it out.
Right. And another caller posted something here with me. He said you can also insert any numbers on the application form, such as 00000 or 12345. which may satisfy the system letting you go forward,
Right.
but really protects what you're trying to protect. And I've talked to a lot of members who've done exactly that. And is there a risk?
Sometimes it works, sometimes it won't.
Yeah, as Ford's pointed out, is there some risk in that? Yeah, but that's okay.
It's better than the alternative.
I certainly would agree with that. Let's see. Question here. When negotiating salary, it says, you stated that the initial offer tends to be on the low end of the scale. Do you see a typical range above the first offer that is agreed to in the end? Is it 25% above the first offer, 10%, or is there some sort of a common amount or percentage?
It's a very, very good question. If you look across the board in all the clients I've worked with in my career coaching practice and all the negotiations that we've done for clients or with clients, I would honestly say that the increase typically falls into the range of somewhere between 15 and 30%. That's the average. I'm not saying it's every time. That's the average. Somewhere between 15 and 30% in my experience. However, I must add that I've also worked with clients where we were able to double the salary that they made in their previous position, or where we were able to bump up the offer by as much as 50%. So every case is different. Some cases are more extreme than others. But if you're looking for kind of the mid-range or the average, I would say in my experience it's somewhere between 15 and 30%.
Yep, I think that makes sense as well, and I certainly squares with a lot of the experience that I've had. I think you've got to always approach these things in terms of you got to do something that's within the ballpark of reality and reason and
Right.
not go too crazy about it. So
right.
So that feels like a 15 to 20% kind of a thing to me in those cases. But obviously everything is each one is done separately, as we know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This person wants to know about bonus structures. If bonus is part of a compensation discussion, could you talk a little bit about the types of bonus structures that tend to come up?
Well, that's a good question, and Dave, you may have more expertise in this than I do. But all I can say is I've seen every kind of bonus structure. There's not one size fits all. I've seen so many variations, it's almost impossible to talk about it in generalities. Some of them look very common, white bread. Some of them look very unusual and unique. I've negotiated all kinds of different bonus situations. So I don't really know if I can offer a kind of a generic answer. Can you, Dave?
No, it's too broad a thing because there is no such thing as one size fits all. There depends a lot on what is customary in the industry and just all kinds of things. But in general, if I was to pick a couple or three out of the air, it's fairly typical to have bonuses that are attached, particularly in sales positions, obviously, are attached to numbers of some kind or another. And in other cases, for a lot of senior executives, often bonus structures are attached to company growth in some way, shape, manner, or form. If it's not company growth, it could be the growth of within your own division and things like that. And in fact, most of my corporate experience was Xerox Corporation, and the bonus system, at least that existed at that time for our senior managers, tended to be structured in you've got a bonus that of X, and say 20% of that was driven by let's say management development factors of one kind or another. Another 30% might have been driven by some sort of a number related to your location, and so on. I think it was divided into sort of three areas, and you've got other things beyond that. Certainly, some research online relative to bonus programs will probably get you a lot more information than I've just mentioned. Let's see. Well, this relates to that. This person wanted to know: are there any other resources that either of you might recommend that we could utilize in terms of trying to do our homework on the whole subject of compensation?
Well, there's many books out there on the subject of negotiation in general, and there are some good books out there that talk a lot about negotiating specifically on compensation. As I mentioned earlier, people can go to my website, careerpotential.com, where I have several articles on this subject, and they can go to the ExecuNet resources to find previous information that we've put on there with regard to salary negotiation. There are also seminars, workshops, all kinds of resources where people can access and learn as much as they can about this subject. The main point is that this should not be a topic that only comes up when you're looking for a new job. This is a skill that needs to be developed and polished and maintained and improved over the long term, whether you're working or not. This is a very important life skill, business skill, and job skill.
Yep. Ford, do you have any comments on the current trends with regard to signing bonuses? And is there a rule of thumb in figuring out what such a bonus might be in terms of a percentage of salary?
Right. Well, this is a lot like that question, how do you do bonuses, or how are bonuses paid? Right. It's very hard to say because it's all over the place. I've seen high and low and none at all. And sign-on bonuses are all about how much they want you, how well have you articulated your value, how well have you shown what a great match you are for their needs and problems and challenges. The more they want you, the higher a signing bonus they may give you. So it's up to you to do a great sales job, great marketing job, and then, like everything else, it will be a negotiation process.
Yep. And I think that says it about as well as you can. So the homework is based on kind of what you've done before that, in following that in terms of what's going on in the industry, because a lot of times signing bonuses come because there's it's all, at the end of the day, it's all about supply and demand. So where you see lots of signing bonuses is usually in a situation where they've got more needs than they've got resources to fill them. Let's see here. If you're in transition and unemployed, can you still expect to negotiate a higher salary where you were previously? It seems that companies take advantage of this situation. Ford, I'm sure that's not the first time you've heard that.
That's true. It's all about your mindset. Whether you're working or not, it's all about your mindset. Yep. Are you confident? Are you secure? Or are you desperate and feeling insecure? It's very important to check your own thinking process and look in the mirror and get your head together so that when you go into the interview, you can seem as confident and secure as you can so that you can negotiate just as well as you would have if you had a great full-time job already. So my point here is, I understand this is emotional. I understand that this is very close to the bone, and it can really impact your mindset when you're out of work, you're not making a living. But there's the old saying, fake it till you make it. Negotiation is a game, and you have to be a good actor. And so I think that someone should go in with every bit of confidence and still negotiate, even if they're currently unemployed. You may need some coaching to help you do this, but that's the ideal scenario.
Yep. And it really is a lot, has a great deal to do with what Ford just discussed, as well as how good a job you've done in the course of your interactions with that organization in helping them understand the value that you bring.
That's right. Let me add one thing, Dave.
Yeah.
Whether you're working or not, whether you just got laid off yesterday or 2 months ago, you're still the same person. You still have the same skills, the same abilities, the same knowledge, the same experience. So you are not, decreased in any great sense just because you happen to not be working at this moment. You're still the same person with the same things to offer.
Yep, and I talk to members about that all of the time, because not just because around this particular issue, but also because, and we haven't touched on it too much in this call, but it's something that comes up very frequently, and that is that people firing stuff off into cyberspace and not hearing anything, and so they jump to the conclusion that, God, there must be something wrong with me.
Right.
I'm not hearing from these people. I'm not getting to where I want to be as fast as I want to, and so forth. And what I try to say to them is, look, understand something. And I would say it this way. The average age in this network is 53. So most of us here have got a pretty good understanding of what our track record has been and how successful or unsuccessful we might be. And so, so that the things that have made us successful in what we have done have gone nowhere. You just find yourself in a marketplace that is responding and behaves very, very differently than probably the marketplace you were last involved with. And so you've got to try to put these things in, in perspective. And I think anybody on this call can look back at their own track record and say, yeah, okay, that track record was developed by me, and the fact that I may or may not be working at the moment is irrelevant. Let's see, got time for one more here, Ford. Says, I'm a former Chief Human Resources Officer in transition. As a result, I've either forfeited or cashed out all of my former employer's equity. Hence, you lose a great deal of value. Is it reasonable to try and to negotiate a decent size equity stake as a key leadership team member since you were left at the altar with no equity stake? In other words, this is somebody who had equity before, has lost all that. How can I address that during the negotiation process?
Well, it's two things. How much are you going to reveal? You know, I don't know if you have to tell the employer the whole story about how you lost this and you lost that. I think the important point is that you were given equity. That's, again, a real feather in your cap. It's a nice pat on the back. It shows that they valued you and that they, were acknowledging your important contributions to the previous employer. So should you and could you try to negotiate for something like this again in a future employer? Yes, absolutely. If that's something that's important to you, if it's something that you want to negotiate, absolutely, you can certainly do that if you can first get them to want you. You have to get them to want you, and they have to feel that you're the best candidate for the job. And then once the negotiation begins, you could certainly bring up that topic if it's important to you.
Yeah, and I think that would be the way to the way to do it is to present it in a positive way,
right.
not a negative way. In other words, they may have no knowledge that you had that equity, and so as you somewhere bring it up nicely in the discussion, it gives them something to think about and say, gee, if we really want Ford to join our company, maybe that's something we're going to have to think about because they had that before too.
Right.
Okay. As is true on so many of these calls, we always end up with more questions than we've got time to answer them. But yes, we did get to as many as we could have. But before we kind of wrap things up today, Ford, based on either what you've heard today or whatever, is there anything you'd like to say to the group before we close?
Yes, this topic of salary negotiation is always a sticky subject. It's very emotional. It's very close to the bone. You know, we're talking about your livelihood. We're talking about a lot of ways that we value our own contributions and how we identify ourselves in the world, and our identity is at stake. So I understand that it's a very sticky subject and it can get very personal and very emotional. Nevertheless, I want to encourage people to study this subject, to practice these skills, and see it as a game that can be won, a game that can actually be fun and very, very rewarding. This is a skill. It can be learned, it can be practiced and polished and perfected. It's not something that you should ignore or something you should shy away from. I believe it's a skill that needs to be developed over time and consistently practiced until you get really, really, really confident in this whole game. So keep reading, keep learning, keep practicing, and then you'll get better and better at it, which means that you'll earn more and more over the course of your career.
Great. Thanks, Ford. Certainly thanks also to our audience today for joining us. And I hope you'll take a moment once the program is closed to give us some feedback, because it's important to us to try to deliver the value that we want you to get out of your membership. So if you'd share your thoughts, obviously that helps us to accomplish that goal. So with that, we'll close up the program for today, and wishing everybody a happy and joyous holiday season. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Dave. Bye-bye.